So, Steve, you wrote a book called, if I'm getting this right, Your Jesus is Too American.
That's correct.
That is a spicy meatball. Tell me why the title and what's the book about?
Yeah, so the title is definitely intentionally provocative. I mean, we're trying to grab folks' attention, but the whole idea, and Caleb, I know that you and I've kind of talked about this. Pastoring specifically since the 2016 election has been a unique phenomenon in the American church. And I was just like noticing from a discipleship standpoint that we were having a discipleship crisis in my church. And as I would talk to my friends who were pastors, they were experiencing very similar things, which was that we were seeing that people were less discipled by what Jesus taught, less discipled by what the church had said in church history, and more by namely politics, but really just Americanism, American culture. So my book is probably less just about politics, although politics does come up, but it's just about the fact that we need to resist any other force that wants to disciple us outside of Jesus.
Okay, I like that in theory, but I want to invite you to tease that out a little bit. So, okay, I'm an American. As Lee Greenwood says, I'm proud to be an American.
Yeah,
which I am. And so I like America. I like my heritage. I honor those who come before me. I also like Jesus, follow Jesus.
mm-hmm.
How might some of the forces in my Americanness be shaping me that might be contrary to the pursuit of Jesus?
Yeah, I think that, man, it's a great question. So this is kind of the basic contention of the first chapter to the book, which is that I think that American culture was probably coming out of World War II, almost considered synonymous with Christian culture. Now, that doesn't mean that that's accurate, but I think that everyone just sort of assumed culturally that everyone else either was a Christian or at the very least had similar morals and values that were traditionally associated with Christianity. So they might have disagreed privately, but they would never, no one would ever in 1950 Anytown, USA, be looking to bash the church or Christianity because those were just kind of mainstream values. And what I argue is that as the country has become more pluralistic, more secular, then Christians are scrambling for power because they were so accustomed to church culture and American culture being synonymous. And so the church has sort of lost the ability to be different. And so, kind of the argument that I make early on in the book is that the early church in the Roman Empire was actually powerful and multiplied quickly and grew quickly because it was a force for good in the Roman world that was culturally and theologically distinct. And I'm arguing that that's actually a good thing, and that the church in the 21st century ought to lean back into distinctiveness like the first century church did, both theologically and culturally, and not be afraid to stand out. So, in other words, I think that we could talk about any number of topics where we've become similar, and I'm sure that we will. But I want to challenge the church to think about how to be different and how to lean in on that. And so, yeah, I'm definitely not bashing being American. I love being an American. I actually talk about this in the first chapter too. I'm the guy that cries at fireworks displays. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I am that guy.
I love
But
that.
so I love America. At the same time, I think that, in my part of the world, it's not uncommon to see like an image or a T-shirt of Jesus wearing a sash made out of an American flag, sometimes carrying an AR-15.
Yes, sir.
Like, I just want to say, you are confused about what the God of the Bible is, or who the God of the Bible is, if that's what you're rolling with.
Yeah. We have all this iconography, don't we, of crosses, kind of Jesus-like figures, usually Western European looking, kind of merged with Americana. I've seen. I'm literally in my room that I'm recording this in. I have hanging on the wall a camouflage baseball cap, and at the front is a cross that almost looks like a Chevrolet logo. There's just a little bit more on the bottom, and then on the inside of it, filling it in inside the field, is an American flag.
Exactly.
So you have camouflage, cross, flag, and this was distributed by a student Christian ministry that ministers to students all around America. And this was given away at their fundraiser. And so it's this conflation of, right, something that's Christian, that any Christian could claim, and then the merging of that with something that's American.
That's it.
And that's iconography. What about values? What are some of the American values that may be influencing us away from a Christian value? Where are you finding those things in conflicts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that the front lines right now are the just the interpretation and the understanding of power. That's really probably it. I mean, we're as Americans, we like to win.
Mm-hmm.
We're Ricky Bobby. If you're not first, you're last. And
That's right.
just this sense that we want to win. And so I think that we see this specifically played out in the political realm over and over and over, which is people who claim the name of Jesus in the political realm who will then engage in any number of very unchristian policies and unchristian practices in the name of maintaining political persuasion, power, etc. And I mean, man, that is number one. And what's crazy then is to hear people say, well, say things like, well, that's what we got to do.
Yeah.
This is just the world we live in these days. And the reason that I want to push back on that is to say we need to be able to imagine again what it looks like to be a minority and to be a creative minority, I guess.
Yeah. So in America, you mentioned that we are power hungry. And we love to flex as a people. If I'm not mistaken, most of our corporate money, meaning when we collect our money together, our resources through taxation, if I'm not mistaken, a good portion of that, if not the majority, goes to military defense, or what we call defense.
That's right.
And 4th of July, Veterans Day, we see iconography of warships, battles, planes, silhouettes of American soldiers, sometimes with Bible verses on top of them.
Yes.
Greater love has no man than to lay their life down for their friends.
That's right.
In bold letters right over a battleship or something like that. And it seems to be conflating the sacrifice of Jesus with either military power or military sacrifice.
Yeah.
How is the Christian teaching on power distinct from the American teaching on power?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting right at it, and we probably should then shoot into the topic of money because you kind of hit at it there after that. But I think that first, the American teaching on power is that we got to go get it, and typically we have to go get it by flexing our strength, our muscle. And we have, I mean, you described it, Caleb. I think that what we've done is we have made it sound like we're always the good guy. And so it's, if we have to go, invade or bomb or whatever, then we're always justified in those causes. And by the way, I want to just give a caveat here. I'm not saying that there's never a reason to go to war. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. I would say that I think that we're probably a little too quick to that, but that's not even the argument that I'm making right now. I just want to talk about the fact that just in general, I think that we tend to believe that we know how to use power and that we're justified in our use of power. And I think that another thing that's huge in America, and then that the Christian world teaches differently, is revenge, vengeance. whereas Jesus is telling us, we're supposed to love our enemies. And everything around us is telling us that what we are supposed to do is we're supposed to wipe out our enemies. And I just think, like, whenever you start taking these two big cultures, so I really feel like what World War II did was it sort of told us we are the bulwark against evil in the world. And I think that we sort of adopted that mantle as a nation. And I think that it has caused a lack of self-reflection from time to time. And particularly, it has prevented the Christian voice that should, at moments stand up and say, hey, before we decide that we're going to go sacrifice, some of our young people in battle, maybe we ought to think about whether or not this is actually the moral thing to do in this moment. So those are just a few of the thoughts that are jumping out as you're talking about that.
So we've got a distinction between the Christian teaching on money and power.
Yes.
Are there any other big categories where our Americanness might come into conflict with our Christianness?
Yeah. So in the book, what I did is, so I sort of set up this beginning where I say, so Jesus has a very different way of looking at the world. He calls it the kingdom of God. And instead of looking at the world the way that it is, Christians ought to look at and live in the world the way it ought to be. And so we're aiming our lives towards the eternal perspective of how a redeemed creation will look one day. And so then I just say, so let's look and see what Jesus teaches. And so I have chapters on Jesus on power, Jesus on money, Jesus on race, Jesus on suffering, Jesus on sexuality, Jesus on politics, all of these kinds of things, because I think that the American perspective ends up being, I mean, we all live in it and swim in it. So sometimes we don't even sense the water that we're swimming in. But I think that those are really kind of the big buckets. And so what I'm trying to do is to show how following Jesus is going to make you distinctive in the middle of that.
So thinking about following Jesus making us distinctive, we're in this moment where there are a lot of folks who are arguing for statements like America is a Christian nation, or we need to make America Christian again, that we need Christians to be in power in order to become a righteous people. God's blessing will be removed if we continue down this path. Therefore, we need to become Christian again. How do you make, I mean, you're in Texas, you're hearing some of this stuff too, I think. How are you making sense of those statements? What do you think people are advocating for? And where do you think it might be distinct from the teaching of Scripture?
Yeah, I mean, Caleb, I don't know what you see there in Phoenix, but what I tend to think is that most people, depending on their involvement in evangelicalism, have heard at some point that the United States is the new Israel. And I think that that's kind of a line that was, I know I heard when I was growing up, and city on a hill kind of imagery within political speech and that sort of thing. And so I do think that there is this sense in which it's confusing because, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, Christian texts, imagery, philosophies, ideas were used in the formation of the United States of America. We can't deny that. I think to do that would be bad history. But I do also think that we then, particularly within evangelicalism, kind of do an equal fraud whenever we try to read back over and turn Thomas Jefferson, into the forerunner of Chuck Colson or whatever. I mean, like that's just not a good look.
Yeah.
And I think that what ends up happening in the middle of that is that what we're doing is we're saying that the American project really is just a dream. Like the idea of pluralism, the idea of people working together, that will never work. And what's interesting is that, if you go back, I mean, you probably already know this stuff. Your listeners probably already know too, but I mean, people used to be afraid of a totally different group of people, a totally different group of immigrants 100 years ago. The Irish and the Italians were big problems, 100 years ago in the minds of
Mhm.
individuals because they, were poor or lazy or too Catholic, and they would take their orders from the Pope, and they wouldn't actually, mix well with Protestants. And so I think that we have a history of being fearful. I think the good news in America is that people can be reasonable, and I think that historically we have been. I think that the problem that we're running into right now is that there feels to be, through social media and some kind of dark money that's hidden, I think more concerted efforts to to galvanize, for whatever reason, Christians against this. And I don't know if you've been able to kind of discern the reasoning why that is the case, but that's been sort of the observations that I'm seeing in my part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you making sense of the last 4 to 8 years? As you're a pastor, you're in Texas, you love the Lord, you love America, but as you're kind of playing back the tape, how are you making sense of it? How would you describe what's happening?
Well, I'll answer it, but I want to hear the same from you. I would tell you that what's really weird is that the 2016 election was the first election where I felt like I was blindsided when I would preach, that people would read into what I was preaching. They would read
Mhm.
in that I was trying to make subtle political messages.
Mhm.
Now, I want to be, pretty clear. I've got social media accounts. I'm on the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Mhm.
That kind of stuff. But man, I'm not a big cable news watcher. I'm not aware of all the different talking points. I had missed all that. So what was wild is, like, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Bonhoeffer,
Yeah.
and we were getting close to the election, and I was just kind of noticing some of the vibe that people were saying some of this stuff in 2016, and I just said, hey, we just got to remember. I threw this picture up on the screen in our church of a church altar with the Lord's Supper table that was draped in a Nazi flag, and I just
Mhm.
said,
Mhm.
look, I'm not saying that United States is Nazi. Don't hear that. But just, we look at that and we cringe. Like, I can't believe they would do that. And I said, I just want us to recognize the way we avoid that is we just don't mix these two, which is why
Yep. Right.
our particular theological tradition has always been very strong in support of separation of church and state.
Mhm.
Man, I mean, within hours of wrapping up that sermon, I mean, I had email saying, I can't believe that you think that Trump is a Nazi. And I was
Right.
like, wow, man, I was not saying that whatsoever. And that was kind of like the first salvo that election year. And it was then that, man, no matter how I approached a topic, it felt like my church is pretty purple, so to speak. I got a lot of red, a lot of blue.
Mhm.
And man, no matter what I chose, I was getting shot at by half the congregation.
Yeah.
And then as we went into COVID, it just got even worse. Like, no matter what you say, you just kind of get creamed.
Yeah.
And so that to me was really the beginning of why I wanted to write this book, because I was like, we are not taking our cues from Scripture, And I mean, look, I'm gonna get to heaven one day. I'm gonna stand before the Lord. He's gonna be like, man, you were really wrong on this topic or that topic. I get that, but, like, I mean, a lot of this stuff was just kind of slam dunk, straight from the mouth of Jesus kind of stuff. And people were, I mean, Caleb, one time I preached a sermon on being generous to the poor.
Yeah.
And afterwards, a guy was like, man, I didn't know Pastor Steve was so liberal,
Right.
and
Yep.
it's just like,
Yep.
it
Yep.
was
Yep.
just weird watching, like, um, the talking points. I mean, and it was just wild to watch the talking points that were coming from cable news and social media, making it basically just straight into the mouths of my church members. It was the weirdest thing. And yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you see that kind of stuff? Was that
Oh yeah, man. For
similar
sure.
experience? Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 2016 for me was, so I've been at the church since 2001, met the Lord here on staff in 6. lead pastor in 2015, and I thought I knew what I was getting into. 2016, I remember thinking, okay, this is Phoenix. This John McCain, Barry Goldwater. There's a statue of Barry Goldwater down the street from where I'm at right now. So I kind of figured, I kind of know where people are at. There's probably, the majority are conservative. There's a good
But
portion
like
of
kind of
Democrats too, but
a more moderate conservative.
yeah, moderate, like kind of a libertarian, keep the government small, no taxes, that kind of stuff. And I thought I knew where we were at. What was striking to me as I look back on the last few years of pastoring was how I missed it. I think, I don't know if I was naive or if I wasn't reading it right. I remember thinking, 80% of the folks are with me on this toxic polarization, kind of the way, the dehumanizing speech. Like 80% of the congregation sees that this stuff is bad. Even if they pulled the lever for the red team, they're not into the empire worship, the anti-democratic, anti-pluralistic stuff, the dehumanizing stuff. They can't be, so plug their nose and pull the lever. And what was striking to me was that a healthy portion of people they didn't plug their nose. They were giving full-throated support, not only to the political postures, but to the means by which those postures would be attained.
Mm-hmm.
Combativeness, othering, enemy type language. I would have people in my congregation using derisive speech to speak to each other on social media.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you that. Like, I was watching these people that, like, for years, Caleb, I would have been like, man, these are godly people. Like, I would be like, man, I would trust them to lead in the church in any way. And then, like, all of a sudden, they are just throwing out Molotov cocktails on Facebook or what. I was like, what in the world is happening?
Yep. And for me, my analysis of it is that season was apocalyptic in the sense of apocalypse being unveiling what was once hidden, now making plain. It was all there. It was just at hushed kitchen table conversations. And what 2016 did was it gave a permission structure for everyone to say, hey, that quiet stuff you're whispering just to your closest friends at the dinner table, you can actually say that at the potluck now.
Yeah.
And so it started happening, and it happened more and more, and the division and the combativeness, everyone became more entrenched. And so, to this, it is not uncommon for us to receive a letter or an email from someone saying, we're leaving the church. We want to find a church that more aligns with our politics.
Yeah. I had the same experience. I actually had a church member send me an email that was like, you really ought to look into such and such church with such and such pastor, because they're really doing some great things trying to stand up for America right now.
Right.
And I was like, man, like we're running after two different things. That was maybe the kind of moment when the penny dropped for me, where it was like trying to do great things for America. Like, man, I'm trying to do great things for the church right now. So that's the thing that was just really kind of confusing.
Yeah, it's almost like the church, Christianity, scriptures became tools for a greater end.
That was back to that power thing. Yeah. That's really what would have been a better way to put that. Like, the church is just a way for me to actually keep the White House or keep Congress.
Right.
And there seems to be like this general thought, like, again, this is where people like think, oh, well, you don't think that politics matter. No, I think politics matter. I think laws matter. I think morality matters. Of course. I just don't think that whether or not Jesus is effective is going to be determined by who's in the White House or who's in Congress.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let's step into that. Okay. So you're pastoring people who want to follow Jesus and want to be good citizens, patriotic, engaged in this common life together. How do you pastor people into thinking about, being wary of the American Jesus? Okay, so we don't want to Americanize our faith, but at the same time, we want our faith to impact us as Americans. So how do you coach or pastor people towards a healthy civic engagement as Christians living in America?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I try to say regularly is that I'm not saying politics is bad. If God calls you to run for office, I want you to run, and I want you to do it in a way that's, integrity and is in line with what it means to be a follower of Jesus. If you want to have civic engagement, be a poll worker, a poll chaplain. You want to be someone who, is passionate about policies and engaged. That's great. I want you to vote your conscience and that sort of thing. What all of that is within, I think, what Jesus teaches. The problem is when your identity, your emotional state, and your theology end up being dictated by those conversations and being dictated by the outcome. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but man, I saw people that were just, devastated whenever Trump won, and then in 2016. Then kind of the opposite set of people who were devastated in 2020 when Trump lost. And it was like, man, Jesus is kind of our thing. So all of that to say, like, I'm not opposed to civic engagement, but I just keep trying to tell people, like, the kingdom of God is really kind of our jam, and that's the thing that we need to be running in. And not to be too Hierwasian or, well, basically, I would say that, like, the way I try to approach, like, the political thing is I would say, okay, we need to take the idea of Hierwas to create an alternative city. But then at the same time, we need to take the MLK approach of then trying to do something active to take that city into the public square that others can see that there can be a better way. So I kind of like that idea of marrying those two approaches. But I think that most of the time in the 21st century, evangelicals are super fired up about the public square, but they forget about the fact that we can create something that is beautiful internally in the church. Loving our neighbors, being generous, practicing faithfulness, looking to love the people who live right around us and to serve them, to wash their feet. Like, those are the things that Jesus taught his followers to do. So those are things that I would love for us to lean into.
Yeah. So we're both pastoring congregations that are growing anxious as we approach the next election. I know, at least in my context, there's a lot of folks who are kind of reliving some of the trauma of 2020 because of how this particular election is shaped up with Trump and Biden. Many folks now, I think, different than 16 and even 2020. The thing that's different now is the lines have been drawn and everyone kind of has a sense of where each other are at. The combativeness, however, has not dropped.
Right.
How are you helping people fix their eyes on Jesus in these next few months as we approach the election?
Well, Caleb, I'm about to tell you something that it was stunning to me, but our church, we recently had just kind of a staff retreat, and our church has elders, and these elders before that went away and prayed and came back, and they were like, hey, this fall, we really want you guys to focus on enemy love as an emphasis for the church. And I mean, I kind of laughed. I told our staff, I said, like, I don't know of another church in America that said, man, what's your strategy, this year to reach your community? Like, man, enemy love. We're just leaning in on it. But that was where it was. And honestly, I think that that's probably our best tool, because I think that exactly what you're saying. I think that politics is all about competitiveness, competition, winning, crushing, and enemy love is the opposite. So I think we're going to lean in on that. The other thing, man, I heard Esau McCauley one time in an interview, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, I wish more Christians would run for office, but they would actually run as Christians. Like, this is literally what Christians believe. And he said they would probably almost all lose, but then, like, if they would actually say what Christians believe and lose and be gracious in it, we might actually see the Christian witness in the United States grow.
Yes.
And I don't know that I have a way to point people into that just yet, but that would probably be the other thing I would like to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I heard Esau say something that I've been meditating on since I heard him say it. He said he has this dream of on the 4th of July, a day of liberation where every Christian in America becomes independent, ends their political party, and then says to the parties, come get us back. Like, show us how you're going to align with what we care about, instead of giving full allegiance to the party, saying, listen, we're going to actually band together and we're going to ask you, partisan groups, to attract us back by articulating your values.
Yeah, I mean, like Caleb, earlier on you were talking about the military spending in the United States. I don't know the number. We could pull it up. I mean, it's in the trillions. I mean, like in my city alone, thousands of people are going to bed hungry every night. We can literally fix that by saying we're going to buy one less F-35. Like, I mean, this is not a difficult problem to solve. We can do that, just by reappropriating some funds, but we choose not to do that for whatever reason. And I don't think that that's something that we've been able to figure out for whatever reason. And I think that you're right. I think if Macaulay would do that kind of, or if Macaulay's right, like if we did that kind of stuff, then I think that we would end up in a better place.
Yeah, man. Well, Steve, I'm glad that you have it all figured out, and I'm anxiously awaiting your book, Your Jesus is Too American, which is coming out. When's it coming out again?
Yeah, October 8, 2024 Great. Is the release date.
Beautiful. Steve, where can people find you and your work?
Yeah. So my website's pretty easy, stevebezner.com. Church website, HNW, stands for Houston Northwest, hnw.org. You can find me on social media, the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X, @Bezner, Instagram, @SBezner. So those are the places where you can find me.
That's great. And just before we conclude, what's your favorite part about the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, my favorite part about the Dallas Cowboys definitely was the 90s. I mean, That was it, right? I mean, the triplets were magical, man. I think I was a junior in high school whenever they won the first Super Bowl in the 90s. I was a fan. I've been a fan since birth. It's been a long-suffering fandom since the 90s.
Yes.
Yeah, man, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And sadly enough, I still root for the Cowboys. It's not been easy, but I still do it.
You know what, Steve? I believe, because I'm in the same boat. I've been a Cowboys fan since I was a kid, and it's going to pay off this year. I'm just convinced. This is the year, Steve. Okay?
From your lips to God's ears.
Well, let us stand together in solidarity and pray in this direction. Then, with all the chaos that's going on, let's elevate this to the top of our prayer list. Yeah. Well, Steve, thanks so much for being on, man. I appreciate your work. I appreciate you dedicating the time to write this book to help the American church see the way of Jesus more clearly.
Thanks, Caleb. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.